When I was young, I remember taking long drives in my father's Jeep. I would drive at night to get away from everyone else, to have some space and time to think. I would drive into the darkness, into the woods, away from the clusters of houses that dotted the landscape of my hometown. I have memories of those drives, times when I would get lost, times when I saw deer and other creatures in the night that were also trying to live their lives away from everyone in the dark. I remember one time I was driving late at night, and as my car swung around a corner, my headlights picked up the image of an old man standing in the middle of the woods at midnight, wearing jean overalls and glasses. His glasses reflected the light of my headlights, and as I hurtled past him, we stared at each other, startled. Then we were gone. I wonder now what I was looking for then, what I was trying to get away from. Growing up, I loved the freedom of driving. It was faster, alone, secure. The drive-in is a place which plays on both our love of cars and our love of movies. The drive-in was invented by a man named Richard Hollingshead, whose family owned and operated the Hollingshead Chemical Company in Camden, New Jersey. The first drive-in theater that Hollingshead built broadcast its sound out of one set of speakers which were attached to the base of the projector tower. This created a sound delay for the last several rows of cars and was later revised. I can tell you more about the history behind drive-in theaters, but what I know about theaters just comes from what I like. However, work in the entertainment industry does run in my family. My grandfather used to work on the radio when he was younger. He worked on several radio stations in Portland and Indiana before he went into the military. He really loved the radio, and Granddad used to call his radio work live daydreams, because his voice got into people's heads and took them somewhere else, even if that somewhere else was just tomorrow's weather forecast. My granddad eventually moved into films, making a series of documentaries for the military. My granddad's father had come to the U.S. from England, where he made a living there playing musical accompaniment for silent films, and he hoped to make the same living here, but he was disappointed when his plans were thwarted by the advent of the talkies, or pictures with sound. My granddad admired those actors who had made the transition from silent to talkie films, and I remember him commenting on a man named Adolphe Munjot, an American actor who started his career in silent films, then made the successful transition to talkies, and was eventually nominated for an Academy Award in 1931. Munjot was known for being a very well-dressed man about town, and he won Best Dressed Man in America 9 times, though no one had a strong sense of who he was as a person. In one of his lesser-known roles, he played the male lead in a 1932 film called Wives Beware, a film which TV Guide describes as an unpleasant little comedy, despite its strong cast. And despite of this, in 1933, Wives Beware was the first movie to be shown at the Hollingshead Drive-In. In the film, Adolphe plays a newlywed who feigns amnesia in order to get out of his marriage and reinvent himself as a car salesman. Whether this film is bad or good is not really for us to decide, as there are no more copies in existence, but the fact that Adolphe's character chose the car as a method of being able to start a new life, unfettered by the responsibilities that his former life had trapped him in, is something that is perhaps universal to the idea behind the American automobile. The drive-in is a place where we come to be still, where it is not the light from our headlights, but from the projection booth that fills the screen, a place where we come to watch as others move through time and space before us, where we can travel while parked. Of course, that projection light is not always used with film anymore, as sometimes it's now video. But whether film or video, light is still the main element used to create these worlds. And it's not only Hollywood stars that we can see anymore when we go to the movies, but real stars, as the technology to make films and the technology to shoot films has gotten better and better, making things look more and more realistic. These 3D spaces are projected on a flat surface, and we lose ourselves in these environments that look real but aren't. Kind of like postcards. Wish you were here. We can capture on film things we have never seen before and things that don't exist. We can make the past the present, speed up and slow down time. Those films of the 1930s and 40s are now only looked at for their historical value, not as much for their entertainment value. They are more useful as a cultural marker, a record of styles, values, and attitudes that were from a certain time. As time went on, those values changed, as did attitudes toward the drive-in itself. In the 1940s, Adolphe Mungeot, who up to this point had played a variety of iconic characters, chose to use his position in the movie industry to support and be a friendly witness for the House Committee for Un-American Activities in its search for communist elements in Hollywood. Adolphe was filmed during the proceedings, playing himself, while the committee asked him a variety of questions.
You tell the committee whether or not there has been an effort on the part of any particular group in the motion picture industry to inject communist propaganda into pictures which would serve the Communist Party line.
I have seen things that I thought were against what I consider good Americanism, in my feeling, and I have seen it in, I've seen pictures I thought shouldn't have been made.
This is a foul philosophy, this communistic thing. I would move to the state of Texas if it ever came here, because I think the Texans would kill them on sight.
He had finally found an audience who responded to who he was, not simply a character he was playing. His political ideals caused him to be shunned by other Hollywood stars, and I sometimes wonder, was he simply trying to take a stand, to be seen as something other than a multitude of screen characters that for most of the American public composed his identity? Other friendly testifiers included Walt Disney, Ronald Reagan, and Gary Cooper, as well as other Hollywood stars. I've never met anyone famous in real life. My grandmother got mistaken for Nancy Reagan a lot. And I've heard that Ronald Reagan was an actor, but I've never seen any of his films. Both John Wayne and Adolphe Mungeot were also leading members of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, a group formed to oppose this communist influence in Hollywood. In 1944, the Alliance issued a statement of principles which said, "We believe in and like the American way of life, the liberty and freedom which generations before us have fought to create and preserve. In our special field of motion pictures, we resent the growing impression that this industry is made of and dominated by communists, radicals, and crackpots. As Americans, and as members of the motion picture industry, we are inescapably one of the world's greatest forces for influencing public thought and opinion. We refuse to permit the effort of communist, fascist, and other totalitarian-minded groups to pervert this powerful medium into an instrument for the dissemination of un-American ideals and beliefs. We dedicate our work to the presentation of the American scene, its standards and freedoms, its beliefs and its ideals, as we know them and appreciate them." The American scene and the drive-ins that presented it, however, were changing in the eyes of the American public. By the 1950s, the privacy that the drive-in afforded its patrons had led them to be dubbed passion pits, and their popularity as a family destination waned. In 1963, Adolphe Mungeot died of hepatitis, and the Alliance officially disbanded by 1975, which some say contributed to the moral decline of the movie industry in general. By the 1970s, as a way to regain lost income, many drive-in managers began showing pornography, screenings which capitalized on many of the drive-in's very remote locations. The widespread popularity of VHS, video rental chains, and cable television led to the drive-in's continued decline, and over time, many of these theaters were demolished, their sites turned into strip malls, parking lots, and even churches. like the former Woodland Drive-In Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was in the parking lot of a church not unlike this that, in the back seat of my parents' Jeep that I used to drive through the woods at night, I eventually lost my virginity. So while the drive-in may not be around anymore, taking its place are all these other spaces where people will go, will still drive to, will use as a place to think about time, space, and maybe to be together, while also still being alone. You know, I heard this quote one time, and it was about a house, but I think it still applies. Someone said, "The thing it takes to make a house a home is not what you put in it or how long you live in it. It's a place where you feel comfortable daydreaming." That a house is not a home because it holds your stuff, but because it holds your dreams. Not what you have, but the things you've put out into the air and lost to time or forgetting or a missed moment or whatever. If that's how a house functions as a home, then do these drive-ins only really function because they gave us a shell to project these narratives, these dream landscapes and worlds onto? Are movies then more about dreams and moments that we've lost instead of what we remember? As we look at those lights on screen, what are we really searching for? What does it feel like to drive through your dreams? My grandmother, the one that looked like Nancy Reagan, passed away suddenly after a long while where she had trouble distinguishing between hallucination and reality. It was difficult for her to remember who she was, where she was, and what she was doing. We kept having to tell her not only who she was, but who we were. Sometimes, after the fourth or fifth time reminding her who I was, I would stay silent while she would talk to me as if I was my mom or her sister. I would let her think that I was whoever she wanted me to be. If these spaces where we watch films are spaces for dreaming, the people on that screen can be anything to anyone, while inside of our cars, we exist in a space that is only ours, together and alone. In these spaces, anyone can be a mother or sister or lover. Who are these characters that we drive to see, that we stare at? Who are these people around us, also staring, also alone? They could be Ronald Reagan. They could be Adolphe Munjo. They could be my grandmother and grandfather. We will never know them really. But for a moment, they are whoever we want them to be. For a moment, we can watch them, and we can be in our cars, and we can live a life other than our own. For a moment, we can live in our dreams. In the same way that Minjo's character started a new life selling cars, in the same way that I used to drive through the dark, in the same way that all of us come to the movies to watch other people move through time and space, we all need that escape, even if only for a little while. And what will we do when it's over? We will leave. We will drive away. We should get ready. This movie is almost done.